Is it a pause or is it a ceasefire? The United States and Turkey announced some sort of temporary agreement in northern Syria 1 week after Turkish forces begin a military assault. Hello, I'm Nathan King, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. US Vice President Mike Pence is calling it a ceasefire for at least 5 days after meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara.
The Turkish side will pause Operation Peace Spring in order to allow for the withdrawal of YPG forces from the safe zone for 120 hours. All military operations under Operation Peace Spring will be paused, and Operation Peace Spring will be halted entirely on completion of the withdrawal.
The United States had issued economic sanctions against the Turkish government and had threatened additional sanctions if the military operation was not halted. President Erdogan wants to remove Kurdish-led forces from the border area and create a safe zone where millions of Syrian refugees now in Turkey could be resettled. US President Trump faced heavy criticism after removing American troops from northern Syria, leaving US allied Kurdish fighters to face the Turkish military. Before the announcement, I spoke with experts from the region. Joining us from Ankara is Tulin Daloglu. She is publisher and chief editor of the Turkish magazine halilimiz.com, and here with us in the studio is Sirwan Kajjo. He is a Kurdish affairs analyst and journalist. And from Damascus, Mohamad Ali is correspondent for Press TV. And Yuval Weber is an associate professor of Russian and Eurasian studies at the Daniel Morgan Graduate School here in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for all of you for joining us. Let's start with you, Tulin, in Turkey. Obviously, efforts to try and get some sort of ceasefire in place. But as far as Turkey's position is, this incursion will continue, correct?
I can tell you from Ankara's point of view as to why this operation was taken. Actually, Turkish Ambassador Feridun Sinirlioğlu had written a letter to the UN Security Council, and he said that there is an imminent threat from the terrorist groups that has accumulated around the borderline, and these are Daesh, the Islamic State, and also the PKK affiliate of YPG and PYD. And therefore, Turkey decided that it is now time to take the action and cross the border into Syria and to clear that zone from these terrorist activities.
So when I'm here in the studio, I just want to pick up on that. This has been well flagged by Ankara as something they've wanted to do for a long time. But many say the catalyst came just last week when US President Trump decided to pull back the small number of troops that they had in northern Syria. Is that right?
Well, since the beginning of the Syrian conflict, when Kurdish forces for the first time took over the region after Syrian regime troops withdrew to focus on fighting Syrian rebels elsewhere, Turkey has been saying that they wouldn't allow the Kurdish entity to be established on its southern borders, that Turkey recognizes the YPG and its political wing, the PYD, as an extension of the PKK, which is a US-designated terror group. But the US has been working with this very group for at least 5 years. They have together defeated the Islamic State physical caliphate in large parts of Syria and Iraq, in Syria, and they have been a very effective U.S. partner in the fight against terror, and terror in general. So, the U.S. makes a clear distinction between the two groups. Yeah, the PKK is a terror-designated group, but the PYD and its armed affiliate, the YPG have proven yet time and time again that they have the ability to transform into a more moderate group by changing the name, for example, to the Syrian Democratic Forces in 2015, and to be more inclusive, include other non-Kurdish elements into it. So right now, the SDF has about 65,000 US-trained fighters on the ground. At least 40% of that fighting force is made up of ethnic Arabs. So this is not a group that has posed any imminent threat to the Turkish, to Turkey. I mean, in fact, since 2012, this area that under the Kurdish control has been one of the safest areas, and while other areas, especially the northwest and Idlib, for example, Turkey has received a lot of threats from the Syrian side. So the Turkish argument is not as valued as officials in Ankara would like it to be.
Well, Yuval, let's follow up on that, because Ankara sort of pointed the finger and said, look, you basically did a deal with one group of terrorists, as Ankara called them, to defeat another group, i.e. ISIL, and now, you know, the US president has sort of turned around and dumped the Kurds, even though the rationale that you've explained, Sirwan, has very much been on Washington books until about a week ago. How do you explain all this, and considering the dynamics in northern Syria?
Well, it seems that there's a lot going on, and the news is moving pretty quickly. But it seems that there are three big things that are happening all at once. The first one is that President Trump, when he was running for office, campaigned on a pledge to get out of Mideast wars. So that's the general background condition. And what he has said over the past week, since basically this very sudden announcement came, is that he's fulfilling a campaign pledge. So there's a domestic politics aspect to it. The second thing is, because this is happening under the shadow of the impeachment inquiry, what he's been able to do in many times past is use the bully pulpit, the power of the presidency, to disrupt news cycles, to divert attention away from sometimes his domestic problems to more international ones.
Where wag the dog sort of thing.
Yeah, to wag the dog in order to reset the news cycle and divert attention away. But because the impeachment inquiry is ongoing, all of his foreign policy actions seem to be essentially colored by that. And that what gets to like the final thing, which is really sort of challenging, even from the Republicans in the House of Representatives, which is what makes a great power is the ability to shape political outcomes on the ground in regions not their own, to really project power. And the United States has been the main external power in the Middle East for a number of decades at this point. And what Trump has done through this action, and it's been so quick that U.S. forces have had to abandon bases, they've had to bomb their own bases.
Incredible stuff. I mean,
really,
just from a propaganda point of view, that's very detrimental to Washington's look, isn't it?
You know, I follow Russian and Eurasian politics very closely, and of watching these videos over the past week, in which Russian journalists, are unclear what their status is, have gone to U.S. bases and just marveled at the technology that the Americans left behind, even laughing to themselves, saying like, "Wow, they left everything in perfect working condition." And so that,
which suggests, of course, a retreat that was not planned.
That it was complete panic, complete sort of like pandemonium to just get out as quickly as possible, which indicates that the president made direct orders that couldn't be massaged. And that's where the president, by removing the U.S. from the ability to shape outcomes on the ground, has reduced U.S. power abroad. And that's really been going back to his real sort of like weakness, which is the stuff with Ukraine is this about his personal interest, or is it about U.S. national interest? What is going on in Syria right now? Is it about a U.S. national interest to get out of the Syrian conflict, or is it about some personal relationship he has with Mr. Erdogan of Turkey? And that sort of choice, where it's either perhaps malpractice when it comes to the conduct of foreign policy, or whether there is some untoward personal interest that he has, that's what makes the opposition from basically the entire U.S. Congress so palpable and so immediate.
I think that's a really excellent point to sort of draw on the domestic considerations here as well as the international ones. But obviously, this does mean a lot for what's happening on the ground in Syria. Mohamad Ali from Damascus, just explain Damascus's position in all this. We understand in the last few days that Damascus has been able to ink some sort of deal with the Kurds in the north. What does this mean essentially towards Syria's civil war, which of course is still going on?
Yes, what it means is that it's an interpretation of the Syrian government officials' statements recently that Syria will defend its unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Now, let me bring you with the latest. The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad gave his first comments since the start of the Turkish military operation 9 days ago regarding this Turkish military operation. Today, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said, and I quote, "The criminal Turkish aggression by Erdogan regime is in the framework of foreign ambitions in Syria. It is a flagrant invasion and a clear aggression which Syria will respond to and confront in all its forms in any part of Syria and in all legitimate means possible." The comments were made during his meeting with the advisor of national security, Iraqi national security, Falah al-Fayyad. Also, we know that Syria's foreign ministry issued today the third official statement regarding what is happening over there, the Turkish military operation. The Syrian government renewed its utmost rejection of the and condemnation of the Turkish military operation, saying that the international community should shoulder its responsibilities in pressuring the Turkish regime to stop this aggression and also put an end to its destructive policies that destabilize the region and cause insecurity over here. Also, Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim, Syrian Foreign Minister, yesterday, he was meeting with with the UN Special Envoy to Syria, Geir Peterson, and he said that this Turkish, let's say, as he said exactly, aggressive attitude actually threatens the work of the Constitutional Committee, which was reached for Syria, and the political process as a whole. Now, on the ground, the Syrian army, yes, did reach a deal with the so-called Syria's Democratic Forces in order to be deployed in 3 parts of northern and northeastern Syria, particularly in Manbij and Kobani, also known as Ain al-Arab, northeast of Aleppo, also in Al-Tabqa and Al-Raqqa countryside, all the way to Ain Isa and Tel Abyad on the borderline, and then to the east, the Syrian army will be deployed in Al-Hasake, Qamishli, Al-Malikiya, and Ain Isa.
Okay, just a quick follow-up, Mohamad Ali. Does this essentially mean that now Damascus is the protector of the Kurds in northern Syria and not the United States? And what does that mean geopolitically? Does it actually make some sort of accommodation within Syria actually more likely?
Yes, it clearly means that the Kurds have realized that the United States has abandoned them. They are leaving the U.S. troops once and for all. The Kurds realize that they have no other supporter but the Syrian army on the ground to save them from the attacks by Turkey, and this is why the deal was reached with the Syrian army. Of course, we have to remember what Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said just about a year ago in a televised speech. He told the Kurds indirectly, "No one will protect you but the Syrian government. No one will defend you but the Syrian Arab army." Those were the words of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And this is an interpretation of what we're seeing now on the ground. Now, what will happen now is that the Syrian army will continue to advance and take control of areas on the borderline, but at the same time, Russia is playing a very important role as a mediator between the Syrian government, the Kurds, and Turkey. Now, we know that Turkey's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Minister, he said in a televised interview that Russia promised to pull out the YPG, the Kurdish People's Protection Units that Turkey is fighting, away from the borderline and have the Syrian army deployed over there. And the Turkish Foreign Minister said that he does not oppose it. It really seems like, in light of the international condemnations of the Turkish military operation, it's unlikely to see Turkey pressing ahead with its military operation for a long time. Perhaps we could be seeing some kind of a deal that Russia will mediate, in which it will allow the YPG to move away from the borderline, have the Syrian army deployed over there, and thus the security concerns that Turkey has and that drive it to carry out this military operation will be vanishing, and thus this military operation should be stopping, because more and more civilians are being killed.
I'll pick up on the Russian angle in a minute, because I think that's obviously worth exploring. But let's go back to Ankara, Tulin. We had this letter that emerged to Turkey's President Erdogan from the US President Trump, which was bizarre in some levels in the language, but the message was kind of clear: don't do this. And then I want to play you this clip from President Erdogan, who essentially sets out the Turkish point of view, and ask you off the back, can the US deter anything at the moment with Ankara? Let's just listen to Turkey's president.
There has never been any such thing in the history of the Turkish Republic as the state sitting at the same table with a terror organization, and never expect such a thing from us. Our proposal is that right now, all the terrorists lay down their arms, their equipment, and everything, destroy all their traps, and get out of the safe zone that we have designated.
Tulin, obviously strong words there from the president. There were strong words from President Trump in that letter. It looks like Ankara is just, well, we heard that the letter was thrown in the trash. Essentially, that's what those words mean as well, right?
Well, that's the only reaction that we heard from Ankara, and the president has been in the talks with the Vice President Pence today. He didn't yet make any statements, so we do not know whether he's going to make any statement further than what's been already, shared in the public. But the Turkish population has really reacted strongly against this letter, against the tone. And there's been a lot of, social media traffic today. And so people really got annoyed with this tone and with the way how Mr. Trump referred to Erdogan.
Yeah, and so on the threat to destroy Turkey's economy again kind of gone down well.
Right.
Does this, what are the dynamics here?
Well, Turkey, the United States has threatened before to destroy Turkey's economy. Trump used the same method when he was trying to release Pastor Andrew Brunson, and it worked. And he mentioned that in the letter.
Very much so.
Yes. So this is one method that the United States has been also threatening throughout the Turkish campaign to enter northeast Syria. Although a lot of people on the ground that I talked to, Kurdish officials, Kurdish military officials, say that these have no immediate impact on.
Well, you've lost your leverage if we withdraw the troops, right?
Right. Yeah. So they say that this is good in the long run to destroy Turkish economy, but it won't be able to stop the ongoing incursion, which is exactly what the Kurds want right now, as the humanitarian crisis is unfolding.
Yeah, then let's pick up on the Russia involvement here, because obviously you study this a lot. This seems like a win geostrategically and within the region for Moscow. That is something that the US president even said, look, let Russia play in the sand.
Sure.
There's lots of sand. Is he right that Russia's going to get more and more involved in a Middle East conflict that can't be solved very easily, or do they become the power broker?
Yeah, so President Trump, his motivation in saying that was to wash his hands of this entire affair and basically let Russia take care of it. But Russia's geopolitical motivation for the past several decades, basically since the end of the Cold War and the end of the Soviet Union, and particularly since the end of the Soviet Union, has been to return Russia to the status of great powers. And what President Putin has done over the past 20 years that he's been in power is to try to project Russian power abroad. And so what Russia has done wherever it can is to find whatever the conflict is, offer assistance to both sides, and then present itself as the mediator in whatever's going on. So as Russia is offering assistance to the Syrian Kurds, and Sergei Lavrov was just last week in Iraqi Kurdistan, so he can offer assistance to the Syrians to deal with the Kurds, to the Kurds to deal with the Syrians, the Kurds to deal with the Turks, and the Turks to deal with the other two. And so when Russia is in the middle of all three, also having relations with Iran, also having relations with Israel, President Putin was just this week or earlier this week in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. What Russia can do at that point is be present. And whatever is going to go on with the end of this war or with this conflict in general and with the Middle East itself, Russia has to be a part of that solution. And that's what Russia's motivation has been this entire time. So in fact, although a lot of people here in Washington and around the world are thinking about how to end the Syrian war, President Putin has a motivation to keep this going as long as possible, no matter how many civilians die, because the longer it goes on and the longer that he's able to present himself as the only person who can bring everyone to the table, that in effect justifies the reason for the intervention and Russia's great power status.
Mohamad Ali in Damascus, Iran, you work for an Iranian publication, another group that is present in Syria. What does it mean for them? I know they're not in that area per se, but obviously the dynamics of this are rippling through the region.
Well, Iran is known for its stances regarding Syria. The Iranian side always expressed support for both the Syrian government and the Syrian people. It has been assisting the Syrian government in its fight against terrorism, the Al-Nusra Front, the Qaeda-linked Al-Nusra Front, Daesh, and other terrorist groups. Almost since the beginning of the crisis in Syria, it has providing also political support for the Syrian government, trying to mediate with the opposition groups also since day one. So Iranian stance regarding the Syrian situation in general is known. Regarding this particular Turkish military operation, Iran did express, even before this Turkish military operation started, its opposition, and it said that everyone should respect Syria's sovereignty, integrity, and unity. And very important point here is that Turkey is a guarantor country in the Astana process on Syria. And in every Astana meeting, the final communique stresses respect by all guarantor countries to Syria's sovereignty, unity, and security, and sovereignty. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing now is that the Turkish side is carrying out exactly the opposite of what it is agreeing on in such Astana communiques. It is actually invading Syria. It is attacking that sovereign country. It is killing civilians. Over 218, I believe, have been killed so far, 18 of them children, causing a catastrophe, a massacre inside, using its air force and using also its ground forces, in addition to the Turkish-backed Syrian armed groups, so-called Syrian National Army, which is expected to be made up of the Al-Nusra Front themselves over there. So you can imagine this Turkish military operation invading Syria against all kinds of international laws and norms, according to Syria's foreign ministry. There is no justification for its attack on Syria, and at the end of the day, it is actually violating the communiques of Astana, the United Nations Security Council resolutions that call for respecting Syria's sovereignty, unity, and almost the entire international community is against Turkey, because at the end of the day, we never saw any attack by the YPG on Turkey. There's no justification for such a military operation.
Okay, Tulin, respond. I think Mohamad Ali's point there is Turkey was not invited, whereas Tehran and Moscow have been into Syria. But for Turkey, obviously, this is a porous border. We haven't talked about the millions of refugees. What's Ankara's position here?
Well, this war has been going on since 2011, so it's been almost 8 years, and actually more than 8 years. When I was listening to Mohammed's take on what's been taking place in northeastern Syria, is that few lines really struck me. He mentioned that this Turkish intervention is causing civilian death. And I'm coming across this kind of line in the US media coverage and, you know, all around actually. Now, I'm not in northeastern Syria. I'm talking to you from Ankara. But I have covered wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. I know what it is to be on the field, both as a journalist and as a journalist eyewitness, have the soldiers and the civilians and whoever is on the field faces when it gets hot. Unfortunately, there is no clean war. Unfortunately, there is no war that has been fought so far that did not cost civilian lives. And when you look at what's been taking place in Syria since 2011, is that really thousands and thousands and thousands of Syrian civilians have been died. So to frame this cross-border operation and to basically, you know, relay some bad blood against Turkey does not serve to anyone's interest. That's, you know, one thing that I think I really need to make clear as I'm speaking from Ankara, because that's not really making any sense for people here when this news coverage is being taking place. Number two, what's taking place? Since Turkey started this intervention into Syria, we see that the Kurds are in talk with Damascus because they believe that their patronage in Washington has sold them out. And prior to that, the Russians really demanded that the Kurds do get in talks, in negotiations with Damascus, but they denied to do that. But whatever is taking place here, now Kurds are talking to Damascus, and I do only hope that this ends the civil war in Syria, and the Syrian authorities do take control of all their lands to end the bloodshed for the Syrian people and to also end the risks of this war of spill over into neighboring countries.
Okay, so I just want you to pick up on that, and also to talk about the fact that the Kurds lost 11,000 people battling ISIS at the US and the international community's direction as well. Do you agree with what you just heard from Ankara?
Of course not. No, because this is not the case. That's exactly the opposite. The Turkish army and their allied Syrian proxies have been targeting civilians throughout the region, from Ras Lain to Tel Abyad, Recep. So, and just 2 days ago, Turkish airstrikes targeted a civilian convoy that included some aid workers, journalists, including 2 foreign journalists. All were killed. More than a dozen people were killed near Serika, near Ras Lain. So to say that Turkey is not targeting civilians is not really the case, because throughout internationally, it's not only about U.S. media or propaganda on the other side of the conflict. It is the UN that says that civilians have been at risk, and over 200,000 have already fled their homes as a result of this incursion. So, and this is nothing new about Turkey. Turkey has also, I mean, a year ago, Turkey carried out a similar incursion into the other Kurdish enclave of Afrin in northwest Syria, where until now civilians are being targeted by Turkish-backed rebels. The UN has stated multiple times in different reports that these groups are targeting civilians, looting their houses, kidnapping for ransom, all kind of things. People fear that the same thing might be happening if this Turkish incursion continues in northeast Syria. As to the Kurdish point of view, yes, the Kurds feel like they have been betrayed by the United States withdrawal from northeast Syria, because they have been fighting side by side for the past 5 years, losing at least, giving more than 11,000 lives in the fight against ISIS. So they feel like they did not deserve how the U.S. abandoned them in this process. The only option they had to stop this Turkish incursion was to ally with the Russians and with the Syrian regime. Of course, they did not like to take that route, but it was the only way, from a Kurdish point of view, to stop this Turkish incursion and protect civilians on the ground.
Yuval, final thought, consequences of this? Are we going to see the resurgence of ISIS, do you think, in the region?
Sure, to some extent, and as my colleague here was describing, it was certainly, President Trump was certainly right in saying, should the United States have an unlimited, indefinite commitment to the Kurds? That's one legitimate question about U.S. foreign policy. What has actually happened has been the abandonment of the Kurds in a rapid and unplanned fashion. And that's essentially what's been causing a lot of the volatility, the haphazardness on the ground. And in that situation, there might be a revival of ISIS in Syria.
Thanks, Yuval, here in the studio, Ankara, Damascus, and all points in between. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.